There are three main parts of this. We have the persona, we have the ego, the shadow, and then all of it together makes up the self.
Let's begin with a truth many avoid. Inside each of us, there is a figure we rarely dare to look at directly. It's not evil, it's not monstrous, it's simply hidden. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the side of our psyche that carries the parts of ourselves we've pushed away, denied, or rejected. It is made of repressed desires, emotions we weren't allowed to feel, and the faces we wear in dreams that we refuse to wear in waking life. But what if I told you that your shadow is the very key to your liberation? The mirror you've been avoiding. The ancient mystics knew this. So did Jung, who gave the shadow a name. In his eyes, the shadow was the unconscious, the parts of you you've buried, rejected, disowned. Not because you're evil, but because you were trying to be loved, to fit in, to survive. Every time you were told to calm down, be nice, stop being too much, another piece of you slipped into the shadows. But energy doesn't vanish, it waits. And over time, those hidden pieces start calling you back, not to haunt you, but to heal you. For 21 days, something begins to shift. Not in the outside world first, but inside. The process is subtle, sometimes even uncomfortable. It begins with an observation, maybe even a memory. You might find yourself reacting strongly to someone. Irritation, jealousy, shame, those are signs. They aren't bad. They're invitations. Your shadow is speaking, and when you listen, instead of pushing those feelings away, you unlock a part of yourself you didn't even know you were missing. In many native traditions, the shadow is not a threat, it's a teacher. The Hopi speak of inner balance, the need to walk with both light and dark. The darkness is not evil, it is mystery. It holds the parts of your story that are still unfolding. It holds power that hasn't yet been claimed. The Toltecs believed in the practice of self-reflection as a path to personal freedom. The dream of the world, they said, begins within you. So when you make peace with your shadow, you change your dream, and the world reflects that back. Most people are taught to fear the parts of themselves that are too much. The anger, the grief, the hunger for more. But the truth is, these feelings are not flaws. They are messages. They are parts of your original self that were locked away. In shadow work, you don't destroy these parts. You welcome them. You ask, "Why are you here?" And slowly, the walls begin to crumble. Jung often said that the shadow will appear in our lives in moments of projection. We see in others what we reject in ourselves. That's why you might be drawn to certain people or repelled by them. Your shadow is trying to bring you home to something you've forgotten. Maybe it's your voice, your wildness, your courage. Maybe it's the version of you who didn't apologize for shining too brightly. When you work with the shadow, these qualities start to come back online. You don't become someone else, you become whole. It's not always easy. The first few days can stir old pain. You may feel raw, like your skin has been turned inside out. That's normal. The ego doesn't like this kind of work. It prefers to maintain its image. But your soul isn't interested in image. It's interested in truth. And once you begin to show up for your truth every single day, even if it's messy, you start becoming someone that even you don't recognize. Not because you're faking anything, but because you're finally shedding the mask. There's a parable from the Sufis about a man who walked into a dark room carrying a candle. He looked around and saw shadows on the wall and became frightened. He believed there were monsters around him, but when he took a breath and allowed the flame to burn steady, he realized the shadows were his own body reflected on the walls. He laughed, then sat in peace. That is what shadow work does. It lights the candle. The monsters are never as real as they seem. What you've been avoiding is often the very thing that will set you free. You'll trace the origin. During this journey, you might also begin to see how your patterns were built from fear, how your reactions were defenses, how your need to be good or strong or right came from a deep wound. But there's something beautiful in that discovery, because when you trace the origin of those patterns, you stop blaming yourself. You start offering compassion, and with that compassion, your nervous system softens, your body begins to relax, and that's when the healing begins to land, not just in your mind, but in your cells. People around you may notice the change before you do. They might say you seem calmer, clearer, even more magnetic. That's because shadow work doesn't just change how you feel, it shifts how you vibrate. And the world, which is always responding to your energy, can't help but respond differently. This is just the beginning. Over the next 21 days, if you stay committed, if you're willing to look at what you've hidden and sit with it without running, something incredible happens. You stop chasing the life you want. You start living it. You begin walking with all of yourself, not just the parts you show to others, but the parts you once thought made you broken. And in that integration, you become someone truly powerful. Shadow work is not a punishment. It is a return, a reunion. It is the path of the mystic, the rebel, the healer, and the creator. It doesn't ask for perfection, only presence, only honesty, only the courage to stay when it gets uncomfortable. And with every day you do, you become more real, more rooted, more radiant. This is remarkably similar to what modern psychology would later explore through the teachings of Carl Jung. Shadow work. The shadow archetypes. The shadow, as Jung would say, is everything about ourselves that we have repressed, denied, or chosen not to see. It is not evil, it is exiled. The aristocrats knew this. They studied their shadows not out of fear, but out of deep understanding. They believed that only by facing these hidden parts could they clear the inner blockages that kept wealth, peace, and power from flowing freely through their lives. One of the key teachings from Jung's theories is that there are archetypes living inside each of us, like old masks the soul has worn through lifetimes. Some are noble, radiant, and generous. Others are cloaked in shame, anger, envy, or fear. But all of them hold power, and each must be acknowledged if you are to hold true sovereignty over yourself. The first of these shadow archetypes was the wounded child. This part of the self still believes it is unworthy, small, forgotten. It often whispers that success is dangerous, that wealth will lead to betrayal, that being seen too much is unsafe. Many aristocrats, despite their outward riches, lived haunted by this voice, and those who prospered in both coin and spirit were the ones who met the wounded child not with rejection, but with tenderness. They sat with its fear until the story changed. Next came the saboteur. This inner figure appears precisely at the moment things begin to go well. It whispers doubts, creates distractions, or stirs up conflict just as you're about to cross the threshold. The book teaches that this archetype is not your enemy. It is trying to protect you from change. In medieval belief, change was seen as a gateway into both opportunity and risk. The saboteur fears losing the familiar, even if the familiar is suffering, and so those who trained under the book's teachings would engage the saboteur like a wary guard at the gate, learning to soothe it, assure it, and eventually move beyond it. Another presence in the shadows is the prostitute, not in a literal sense, but as a symbol of the parts of ourselves willing to trade truth for approval or intuition for security. This archetype does not make you bad, it only shows where you have forgotten your worth. The medieval teachings often used the image of the noble who forgets their lineage and settles for scraps. To awaken abundance, the initiate must remember their spiritual birthright, to stop bargaining their inner gold for crumbs of outer validation. Perhaps the most feared archetype, however, was the destroyer. It shows up as rage, chaos, the desire to tear down everything you've built. But even this figure has its role. As the book reveals, the destroyer only arrives when something false must fall. It is the final test before rebirth. The mystics who followed this path did not run from destruction. They learned to guide it, letting it burn only what was no longer aligned with their truth. All of these archetypes were to be befriended, not banished. The book described a ritual, simple yet powerful, where the initiate would write a letter to each shadow, not to defeat it, but to listen. What do you need me to know? What are you trying to protect me from? What story do you keep repeating that I no longer need to live? These questions became doorways, and on the other side of those doors, energy was freed. Energy that could then be used to magnetize prosperity, healing, and purpose. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Shadow will become your teacher. Reinforcing this, there's a story of a duke who could never hold on to gold. No matter how much he inherited, it vanished. Crops failed, deals collapsed, servants stole from him. It was only after months of inner inquiry that he uncovered an ancestral wound, a belief passed down through generations that nobility must suffer in silence. He had carried this unknowingly, and his unconscious allegiance to it was quietly draining all abundance from his life. Once seen, it dissolved. His fortune returned, not just in coins, but in clarity, freedom, and joy. This is how the shadows teach. They may come dressed in resistance, fear, or sabotage, but they are always bringing us closer to something if we dare to look. In fact, the Book of Shadows ends with a curious passage, written in a mixture of Latin and Occitan. "The deeper the darkness, the more golden the dawn, and no gold may be held by one who fears his own fire." So perhaps the greatest secret of all, the one the mystics whispered only to those ready to hear, is that real growth must be integrated. And that integration begins not by chasing the light, but by walking willingly into the shadows of the self, torch in hand and heart open wide. Because every part of you, even the ones you've locked away, holds a piece of the key. And when you gather all those pieces, not only do you find peace, you find power in the parts of you that you don't want to see. Start your shadow transformation. Parts of you that were rejected, misunderstood, or silenced. They didn't disappear, they just sank, and they've been waiting for your return. That's what shadow work really is. It's not a punishment or a confrontation. It's a reunion. When most people think of transformation, they picture light, glow-ups, radiance, manifestations. But light without depth is shallow. It flickers at the slightest breeze. The kind of transformation that makes you unrecognizable begins in the dark. In the quiet corners of your psyche, where old versions of you still breathe, still ache, still whisper stories you forgot you believed in. And when you meet those parts with love instead of fear, they shift. You shift. Your reality shifts. You've already lived with fragments of yourself hidden behind smiles, achievements, and carefully controlled emotions. But you know the weight of what you've repressed. You've felt it in moments of unexplained anger, sudden sadness, or numbness you couldn't trace. The shadow never goes away. It waits until you're ready. And maybe now you are. Shadow work isn't some overnight miracle. It's a gentle daily practice of asking, what part of me have I been avoiding? And then, without judgment, giving it your full attention. Not to fix it, not to make it perform for you, just to listen, just to witness. This is why people say that after 21 days of true shadow work, you won't recognize yourself. Because for the first time, you'll be whole. There's a strange magic in facing what you once feared. In some Native American traditions, it's said that the warrior does not become strong by conquering enemies, but by walking toward the sacred mountain within. That sacred mountain is your shadow, and the trail begins with honesty. You can't walk around it. You can't skip to the summit. You walk through, one step at a time, shedding the lies you believed just to survive. At first, it's messy. Old wounds rise. You might feel worse before you feel better. But this discomfort isn't destruction. It's detox. You're peeling away illusions you didn't even know were there. Stories inherited from parents, schools, churches, or culture. Stories like, "I'm not enough, I must be perfect to be loved," or, "If people really knew me, they'd leave." These voices were never your own, but you've been hearing them for so long, you thought they were you. Shadow work reminds you they're not, and when you begin to question them, they lose their grip. Something incredible starts to happen when you stop running from your darkness. You stop judging others for theirs. You feel more patient, more grounded, more forgiving, because the same parts of you that were once hidden become the very ones that heal others. Your shadow becomes your medicine. Your authenticity becomes magnetic. People can feel when someone has done the inner work. There's a steadiness to them, a quiet power that doesn't need to be loud to be real. This is the part no one tells you. When you reclaim what you rejected in yourself, you start manifesting from a place of truth, not trauma. You stop chasing things to feel worthy, and instead attract experiences that match your actual self. Not the version of you that's performing, the real you, the one you buried to stay safe. And when that version rises, you become unstoppable. Marry light and dark. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not just the light, not just the dark, but the sacred marriage of both. It's not about being perfect, it's about being honest. And honesty with yourself is one of the rarest and most powerful things you can offer this world, because people are starving for realness. And shadow work feeds you with that, quietly, steadily, day by day. Try it, not once, but for 21 days. Set aside time every evening, light a candle if it helps. Write what hurt you that day. Write what triggered you, what made you jealous, angry, small. Then ask yourself, where have I felt this before? Whose voice is this really? What does this part of me need to say? Let it speak. Don't interrupt. Let it scream. Let it cry. Let it tell the truth you weren't allowed to tell. You'll notice something start to shift. Not all at once, but undeniably. You'll begin to respond to life instead of reacting. You'll hold boundaries without guilt. You'll love others without losing yourself. And slowly, others will start to notice the change. There's something different about you, they'll say, and you'll smile, not because you became someone else, but because you finally stopped hiding. This is the invitation, 21 days, one shadow at a time, no rush, no perfection, just truth. Truth in the places you used to look away from. And if you stick with it, by the end, you'll see it too. The version of you who rises from this work won't just look different, they'll feel like home. There's a strange silence that enters the room just before the transformation begins. It's not loud or dramatic. It's still. It creeps in like a whisper, like the moment before dawn when the whole world seems to hold its breath. That's the space where shadow work begins, that quiet pull in your chest, that urge to finally look in the mirror and not flinch. Shadow work is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Shadow work in history. In the quiet corners of history, there are figures who rose to incredible heights, not just through power or luck, but because they did shadow work. One of the oldest examples we can turn to is King David from the Bible. While most remember him as the young man who defeated Goliath or the king who united Israel, few explore his inner world. David was deeply flawed. He made terrible mistakes. He lied, manipulated, and even sent a man to his death so he could have his wife. But what sets him apart is what came afterward. His most powerful writings, the Psalms, came from his moments of guilt, shame, loss, and longing. These were songs of shadow work, honest cries to the divine from a heart that was no longer hiding. When David wrote, "Create in me a clean heart, O God," he wasn't begging to be perfect. He was asking to be real again, to return to the sacred part of himself that hadn't been touched by power, war, or desire. His writings invite you to do the same. One exercise inspired by this is to write your own psalms when you feel broken. Not to fix yourself, but to witness your own shadow with honesty. Let your hand move freely. You might write things you didn't know you were holding. That's the beginning of release. In ancient Greece, there was Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War. His story is told through glory and rage, but beneath that fire is a soul aching with contradiction. He was invincible everywhere except one spot, his heel. But symbolically, that heel wasn't just a body part. It was his vulnerability, his grief. His unprocessed pain over the death of his friend Patroclus nearly destroyed him. His wrath turned into chaos, and yet, when he allowed himself to feel his sorrow, and not just his fury, he found a different kind of power, a soft power, one not driven by revenge, but by truth. Achilles shows us that shadow work doesn't always come as quiet meditation. Sometimes it arrives as rage that leads us inward. Even Alexander the Great, the man who conquered most of the known world before the age of 30, carried a relationship with shadow that few speak of. He was tutored by Aristotle, yes, but he was also haunted by dreams and symbols. Before battles, he would consult oracles. He believed that forces beyond logic were guiding him, and he often disappeared for days before major events, not to party, but to fast, to pray, to dream. Behind the armor was a man trying to understand his destiny, even when it didn't make sense. It is said that he kept a copy of Homer's Iliad by his bed, and that he saw himself in Achilles. He wasn't chasing land. He was chasing an image of himself that had to be earned, not inherited. A modern exercise you can take from this is to look at the heroes you idolize and ask, what shadow of yours are they carrying for you? What part of you do they act out that you haven't yet faced? Then write a letter from that part of you. See what it wants. That's where the transformation begins. Even in spiritual traditions like Sufism, shadow work shows up in the life of the mystic Rumi. Many know Rumi for his beautiful poems about love and divine longing, but what they don't realize is that his greatest works were born after the loss of his beloved teacher and friend, Shams of Tabriz. This wasn't just heartbreak, it was a ripping open of everything he thought he was. In losing Shams, he met himself. He spun for hours in sacred dance, not to escape his sorrow, but to move through it. He teaches us that pain, when embraced, becomes a doorway. You can mirror this in your own life by creating your own ritual of movement or stillness when pain arises. Light a candle, sit with it, or move to music that mirrors your feeling. Let your body express what your words cannot. Don't rush to fix it. Just let it move through. Throughout time, mystics and kings, poets and warriors have been doing shadow work in secret. They've turned to silence, to symbols, to loss, and to longing, not to be less human, but to become more of who they really were. This is why Carl Jung, the modern psychologist who brought the concept of the shadow to the surface, said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. What these figures show us is that we don't need to fear our darkness. We only need to meet it. You're about to meet yourself. and basing ourselves on this, you're about to meet someone you've known all your life, yet probably never truly listened to. The version of you that hides behind your habits, your reactions, your pain, and even your ambition. In the oldest spiritual stories, from the Sumerian myth of Inanna's descent to the underworld, to the desert journeys of prophets, to the meditations of mystics, there is always a descent before the light. Carl Jung called this the path of individuation, a journey toward wholeness. And at the center of that path is the shadow, the disowned parts of ourselves, tucked away not because they are evil, but because they were once deemed unacceptable. Maybe you were told not to be too loud or too sensitive. Maybe you were punished for your anger or praised only when you achieved. These moments shape the shadows we carry, and they don't vanish. They simply go quiet until you're ready to listen. One of the most profound exercises is to sit quietly and let a fear speak, not out loud, but in your mind's eye. Treat it as a presence. Say to it, "I see you. You can speak now." You may be surprised to find that your fear isn't cruel. It's often very young. It may say, "I don't want to be left behind," or "I just want to be good enough." These fears may have started in childhood during moments you barely remember, and they clung to you not to harm you, but to protect you. But what protected you then might be limiting you now. In this way, shadow work becomes a form of loving reparenting. You become the one who holds space for the younger parts of yourself that never felt safe enough to show up fully. This is why it's not about erasing the past, but updating the inner relationship. And just like in ancient rites of passage, you become both the seeker and the guide, the one walking through the dark forest and the one holding the lantern. The beauty of this process is that it doesn't require perfection. In fact, perfectionism is often a shadow voice itself, trying to protect you from rejection. What's needed is willingness, a willingness to slow down, to feel, to notice the gap between your thoughts and your reactions. When you do this consistently, the patterns that once felt automatic begin to unravel. You begin to ask different questions. Whose voice is this really? Does this belief serve me or chain me? For example, if you were raised to believe that money only comes through sacrifice, that belief may show up as guilt whenever you rest. In a shadow work dialogue, you'd ask that guilt, "What are you afraid will happen if I stop working?" It might say, "You'll be judged," or "You'll lose everything." From there, you start to gently reframe. Is that true? Where did I learn that? Who would I be if I let that belief go? You're not erasing your past, you're updating it with your present wisdom. This is why many philosophies speak of watching the mind, not to control it, but to free it. In Buddhist practice, for instance, thoughts are likened to clouds passing through the sky. They aren't who you are, they're just passing weather. Shadow work reminds you that even the darkest clouds are not permanent. They're moments, not definitions. A reflection in your soul. They say in the highlands of Bolivia, there's an old belief, el espejo del alma, the mirror of the soul. But unlike the mirrors we know, this one isn't made of glass. It's made of memory, it's made of pain, and it's said that it only reflects back the parts of you that you've tried to hide. According to the elders of the Aymara people, every time we experience deep shame, betrayal, or fear, a piece of us breaks off and hides inside this mirror. Not lost, just waiting, quietly waiting for us to come back and look. What's fascinating is that this belief matches so closely with what Carl Jung described as the shadow, all the parts of us we've exiled. Not because we are bad, but because at some point we thought they were not lovable. The difference is that in this Andean version, the shadow isn't inside you, it follows you. The mirror isn't in your mind. It hangs just behind your spirit, almost like a second presence. It's not evil, it's not even dark, it's just forgotten, and it longs to be remembered. Now here's the part that gets whispered, not shouted. The Aymara say that every 21-day moon cycle, this mirror begins to glow when we start paying attention to our own suffering. Not just to complain about it, but to sit with it, to look at the broken edges and choose not to turn away. When we do this, the mirror starts to reflect less pain and more power. It's like by facing what hurt us, we call those missing parts of us back home. And people start to notice. We become unrecognizable, not because we're pretending to be someone new, but because we've finally stopped pretending. The shadows we carry, those regrets, the anger we swallowed, the need for love we buried in silence, they don't want to haunt us. They want to return to us. They want a seat at the table. And when they sit, they stop screaming. In many ways, this old Latin American belief speaks to the heart of shadow work. It isn't about fixing yourself. It's about finally listening. It's about walking into that dark cave where your younger self still cries, and instead of dragging them out, you sit down next to them and say, "I hear you now." What's wild is that this kind of work starts changing your outer world almost instantly. Not because the world suddenly gets softer, but because you're no longer as easily shaken. You stop feeling like you have to earn your right to exist. You stop chasing external validation to make up for internal disconnection. That's when you become magnetic. That's when the old patterns of pain, rejection, and sabotage begin to fall apart. Not because you've learned to fight them better, but because you've made peace with what caused them in the first place. The Aymara also believe that when you do this kind of work during a 21-day moon cycle, it doesn't just heal you, it heals your bloodline. Your ancestors start appearing in dreams. The mirror of the soul holds not just your shadow, but theirs too. They say that the shadows we carry didn't start with us. Some were passed down in silence, others in sorrow, and when you stop hiding from yours, theirs begin to rest. That's what makes this work so sacred. You're not just healing a version of yourself, you're healing many. Every moment you spend facing what you once feared strengthens the path for someone who comes after you. A sibling, a child, a friend, even a stranger. That's how powerful this work is, and most people will never know that they're carrying someone else's grief inside their own body until they stop long enough to feel it. This is why the 21 days are so important. It's not a magic number. It's not a trick to hack your brain. It's a rhythm, a slow, sacred spiral, one full lunar loop where your body, heart, and soul move together in the direction of remembrance. Some days it will hurt, other days it will feel like freedom, but through it all you will remember. You'll begin to notice the hidden strength in your scars. You'll see how many of your flaws were actually gifts waiting for permission. And slowly, you'll no longer feel split in half. You'll feel whole. There's a phrase in the Aymara tongue, Naira Aruma, which means the night with eyes. It's their way of saying that even the darkest parts of us are awake. They watch, they remember, and most importantly, they're ready. So are you. And once you begin this work, truly begin, something strange starts to happen. Your outer world begins to match your inner clarity. People treat you differently. Opportunities find you, not because you chanted for them, but because you made space. You cleared the dust from the soul mirror and allowed your true reflection to finally shine through. Confront your soul. The 21-day journey we've discussed is not just a spiritual practice. It's something that has appeared throughout history, often in unexpected places. One such moment took place during the reign of King Henry VIII of England. This period in history, though filled with intrigue and political turmoil, also provides us with a profound lesson on the personal transformation that occurs when we face the shadow side of our identity. King Henry VIII, known for his 6 marriages and the religious upheaval he caused, offers a surprising example of shadow work. His dramatic break from the Catholic Church in the 16th century wasn't just a political maneuver, it was also a deep reflection of the internal conflict he was experiencing at the time. He sought approval, power, and control, but these desires masked a deep insecurity. His shadow, the parts of himself that he didn't acknowledge or accept, manifested in dangerous ways. His desire for a male heir, his constant need for validation, and his obsession with power all came from a place of inner fear and insecurity. In a way, Henry VIII's entire life was a long and destructive struggle against his own shadow. But there was a moment of profound transformation. As Henry struggled with his own guilt over his actions, his marriages, his break with Rome, the executions he ordered, he came face to face with his own inner darkness. The historical record tells us that after years of repression and outward expression of power, Henry's health began to deteriorate. His body, once strong and commanding, started to break down. He became ill, both physically and emotionally, possibly due to his own internal conflicts, a classic symptom of unresolved shadow work. What makes this period significant, however, is not just Henry's personal struggle, but how his society reflected that same conflict. The English monarchy's relationship with the Church, the shifting power dynamics, and the evolving societal structures mirrored the internal transformations that many individuals were experiencing. The English people, witnessing their king's personal transformation, also underwent a change. The events of the Reformation, sparked by Henry's shadowy internal battle, were a response to the need for a deeper understanding of faith, personal power, and the confrontation with inner darkness. Much like the process we discussed earlier in shadow work, Henry's eventual reconciliation with his own guilt, desires, and fears would have taken time. It's often said that the process of facing your shadow doesn't lead to immediate peace or answers. Instead, it's about confronting the uncomfortable truths about yourself and allowing them to reshape your life. This was true for Henry as much as it is for any of us today. We can look at his example and see how, in times of great personal struggle, society is often forced to confront its own collective shadow. Henry VIII's actions led to the English Reformation, an event that completely reshaped the religious and political landscape of England. His personal transformation mirrored the larger shifts happening in society. By breaking with the Catholic Church, Henry was not just changing the course of history, he was also, perhaps unknowingly, working through his own shadow. Much like Henry, we too are often faced with our own internal dilemmas that affect not only us, but also those around us. Whether it's in our personal relationships, our careers, or our sense of self-worth, the shadow hides in the spaces where we are unwilling to look. And just as Henry's refusal to confront his shadow led to political and personal chaos, ignoring our own darkness can cause issues in our lives as well. The key takeaway from this historical event is that shadow work is not something that can be rushed or avoided. It's a journey that demands patience, courage, and a willingness to face the darkest parts of ourselves. King Henry VIII's struggle shows us that the process of transformation is often messy and turbulent, but it's also essential for growth. In many ways, it was through the crises of his life, his divorces, his need for power, his conflicts with the church, that he was forced to face his shadow and, in turn, changed the course of history. Remember that you don't need a ritual or a special place to begin this process. You just need a moment of stillness and the courage to ask, what is really going on underneath? You might journal the dialogue, let it unfold through movement, or speak it aloud in a safe space. However you engage, remember, Your shadows don't want to be punished. They want to be witnessed. The more you do this, the more you notice something miraculous. Life starts to respond differently. You become less reactive, more present. You stop chasing validation because you're no longer at war with yourself. And from that place of inner harmony, the external world begins to match you. Relationships deepen, creativity flows, even money, opportunities and timing start to arrive more effortlessly, not because you're forcing them, but because you're no longer blocking them with old fear. This is why so many mystics, including Jung himself, believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Shadow work is how you make the unconscious conscious, not by shining a harsh light on it, but by sitting down with it, pouring a cup of tea and saying, "Tell me your story." And when it does, you'll realize that you were never broken. You were just carrying stories that were never yours to hold forever. Letting them speak is how you let them go. And in letting go, you come home. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.